Hello everyone, welcome back to Axon Health. Last week I made a video covering the basics of exercise for beginners. So this week I want to cover the exercise basics for intermediate and advanced athletes. Now before I begin, all the information I have gathered on here is not indicative of everything that can be implemented into program design. Everything I've gotten here, which I will cover later, I have a thank you board for people I would like to thank over the years of all the research, including Mass Research Review, which I'm a member of, Dr. Lee Norton, Chris Barakat, tons of people that have helped me along the way in my exercise physiology portion of my career. And, a lot of great information. So before we go over everything, let's go back to the beginner real quick. And this is a question I've heard get brought up quite a bit. And is there a direct reference to when you're not a beginner anymore? This answer is basically a soft marker. There's no real empirical data to substantiate if you're no longer a beginner. So different people, if you ask 10 different top researcher PhDs, they'll probably all have similar answers, but some difference. But I would say the number one aspect for myself when looking into the future and seeing if you're past the beginner stage is, do you have the major movements mastered? Can you do a hip hinge? Can you do a squat pattern? Can you do a vertical press, a horizontal press, a pull-up, so forth? Do you know how to activate your muscles properly? Do you know how to proper cues, pushing through the floor, abduction of the hips during squat, and so on and so forth? And have you gone for a decent amount of time where the volume or the intensity that you're using no longer substantiates the muscular hypertrophy, for example, or the strength gains and the power gains, and you need some more variety into your programming to keep yourself going, farther and farther in your career. Typically speaking, the more advanced you are into training, the more variety you'll need in all sorts of factors, whether it's frequency, intensity, volume, closer to failure, deloads, and so on and so forth. So everything here really does come down to progressive overload. It's one of the most important parts of factoring into any single program, going over blocks and years of training. And there's multiple different ways to add in progressive overload. Obviously, we know the simple adding more weight over time, but there's so many other factors. Better form, which will translate into more mechanical tension, one of the number one factors driving for hypertrophy. There's just a million different variables that go into progressive overload. It's not just, say, the volume over time, even though volume is one of the most important factors for muscular hypertrophy, the actual growth, in the for long-term stuff. And this is for strength and power too. So now what? This piece right here is kind of where I see things. Analysis of your training history. So going back over the things I just covered, how's your form? How's your activation? And so forth. And looking over how you've progressed over, say, the first 6 months or 12 months of your training career. What's your specificity? It's always context dependent in most things in life, as we all know, especially if you're in the research. And we have to look at where do we want to go with your program design from here. Are you looking for sport specific? Because I cannot help you with that. I'm not, wrestling, basketball, football. I'm not even going to try with that. It's, conditioning type stuff. I know minimal and I know enough, but it's not my field. So, and your availability and schedule. This is an important thing too. It's not a number one most important thing, but, what's your availability look like? Are you a CEO of some company who works 70 hours a week? Or are you a school teacher who maybe works 35 hours a week, and then kind of building that schedule around that? But there's, everyone's goals are going to be specific to what they want. And right here I have written down, even though it's not in a direct order, but adherence and individuality is one of the most important things in staying consistent with a program. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're not going to adhere. This goes the same thing for nutritional intake, whether if you could adhere to, say, the carnivore diet, which I never would be able to or don't want to, that's good for you. It doesn't mean it's a superior option as most people believe. It just means you could adhere to this macronutrient structure, so forth with ketogenic diets and so on and so forth. I'm a flexible eater, so on and so forth. So this is very, very important. Do you need to fully understand physiology, biochemistry, or anatomy at this level? It depends. The more advanced you are, I'm going to correlate a lot of this to bodybuilding specifically, but the more advanced you are, the more you probably need to know about how the body works. If you don't know origins and insertions, more than likely you will not know how to properly activate muscles. As I was explaining to someone in the gym today, as we all know, we see someone do a pressing movement and they go like this, and they protract up, okay? Serratus anterior. not pec major. So knowing the movements, origin insertions, and some other stuff like that can really help. Biochemistry, that depends. The average person can achieve an insanely good physique without knowing anything about biochemistry. Is it cool to know the pathways and NADH and all those other things I completely forget from school because it's not a passion of mine? I did have a lot of biochemistry in chiropractic school, but that went out the window. So in anatomy, I do think, again, it's important. So it is context dependent. So it is important to cover, hypertrophy. So hypertrophy, the enlargement of an organ or a muscle because the increase of its cell size. So we have mechanical tension. How much actual tension is on your muscle when you're going through? There are different factors go into this. Muscle damage. You have some movement patterns, as I was also talking about today with my buddy, that are more eccentrically loaded and can cause more, say, myofibril damage when you're doing the movement patterns. So say like a spider curl, more in a lengthened position, a Romanian deadlift, maybe a dumbbell pullover. And looking at those type of movements can be more important the later you are into your training regimen. And then we have metabolic stress, also known as the pump. I kind of understand the actual physiology of it, but it's not really a specialty of mine, but it is probably one of the least important factors when it comes to muscle hypertrophy. It definitely does have its place. Very, very advanced people. I run RP done by Dr. Mike Israetel, so he does have metabolic blocks where you do focus on the pump, but it is not the most important thing when it comes to muscle hypertrophy, but it does come into play. So, I totally forgot to put the C in basics. So again, we have volume, frequency, and intensity. The farther you go along in your program or in your training career, again, it's not like a specific time frame. It's individual and context dependent. Everyone's different. So studies show frequency usually in a 2 to 3 time pattern. There are people out there like Jeff Nippard who have full body programs 5 days a week, but you have to be very careful about your volume distribution, how much sets and reps, and how close you are to coming in failure intensity, whether it's your percentages, your RPE, your rate perceived exertion, how close you are to failure, RIR, reps in reserve, and so on and so forth. And it's actually very important to talk about this. RPE, so if you have an RPE of 8, theoretically you have 2 reps left. RIR, you have 2 reps left in reserve. What the research that I've seen has showed is it's an art. A lot of people will say to themselves, I'm at an RPE of 8. My max bench is 185 for 10, I got 8. I'm an RPE, I got 8 reps. I'm an RPE 8. But when they actually have them push to concentric failure, they might have gotten 14. So was it RPE 8? This takes time, lots of time to understand specificity to your individual needs of when RPE or RIR should be used. Some people base off percentages and so on and so forth. And there's really no absolute correct right way. Another important factor to talk about, anyone tells you that you must lift this way, and there's black and white statements are usually not a good thing. Just something to talk about. Volume. I like the way that Dr. Mike Israetel, Dr. Eric Helms, one of the main reviewers on Mass Research Review, they've gone back and forth on Revive Stronger, great podcast. And they talk about, should you be adding reps over a training block? Should you be adding sets? I see validity in both. Right now I'm adding sets, which I've never done before, and I absolutely love it. So thank you again, Dr. Mike Israetel, for creating, or everyone at RP, Jared Feather. It's an amazing program. I love it. I've seen great results. So intensity. Again, failure is a tool, but the more advanced you are in a training career, the more likely you're going to have to use failure. Not all the time. You don't want to be taking your first set to failure, but you will be probably needing to utilize drop sets, partial reps, and stuff like that. They do have its place. There's lots of little factors that can go in to the progressive overload scheme to getting farther along in your training career down the road. So these are what I call the nitty details. Now I'm going to move this up a little bit so we can get a little closer. So the nitty details. This is not in any particular order. I just put some things that come to mind. I just scribbled fatigue on here because I forgot to put fatigue on here. Fatigue management. What do we mean by that? Unless you are a professional bodybuilder and you are getting paid to lift, CrossFit, Matt Frazier, how Rich Froning was, all these top guys, bodybuilding, Phil Heath, all these guys. Unless that's you, more than likely fatigue management is going to come into play. What do we mean by fatigue management? Well, it's not just the actual training stress. We're looking at mental stress. We're looking at stress from life. I mean, anything, your kids, your job, your sleep patterns, your nutrition, your hydration. This comes into play when some people might not need deloads as often because the other aspects of their life are more in check. This is a very individual aspect that needs a very keen eye and someone who understands these concepts very, very well. And I'm not going to talk about all these super in depth because I could talk for another 20 minutes, but exercise selection, huge. What's your goal? You know, what type of movement patterns do you want to do? What type of block are you in? Are you in one of the metabolic blocks from RP? Maybe you don't want to use a lot of compound movements because the rest periods are so short and your form might get shaky. That's not saying you have to do that. It's just something that me and my friend who's run it for 18 months, we've talked about. Exercise order, another great topic. If you're a power lifter, your primary movement, squat, bench, dead. So a lot of people like, doing overhead press, but it's not one of the movements in powerlifting. But, how do you want to do things? Do you want to use a Smith machine? There's nothing wrong with that. Are you targeting certain muscles in certain ways? Are you doing more tempo? A lot of people say, Smith machine. It's funny. When you're younger, you're Smith machine. Oh, no. Dumb, man. But when you get older, actually, the Smith machine can have a lot of great benefits. For me, in one of my pushing primary days, I put Smith machine bench as my third exercise. I'm a little bit more pre-fatigued. I can focus a little bit more on adduction of my glenohumeral joint, and I can actually work on the muscle, activating it in a way that if I was doing regular bench, which I've tried, it gets sloppy, and my activation goes. So sets, reps, we've already talked about that. Distribution of volume, how do you want to do? You want to add sets and reps, you can do both, so on and so forth. Big argument on that. Here's a good one. Range of motion. Full bore shortened. A lot of great research on full range of motion. But you can look at some of these professional bodybuilders that use a lot of bro science, they might not use full range of motion. Now they're genetically superior individuals. They are obviously enhanced and they might get away with doing stuff like that. I think, again, it's context dependent. If you are a very, very high level advanced bodybuilder, there are some times where maybe not full range might be slightly more optimal. I don't do that. I use full range all the time for other benefits outside the muscular hypertrophy stuff. But again, if your goal is, how specific, the more specific your goal, the more specific your training regimen has to be. Again, you can use all these different factors. I don't know what I mean by time understand. As you can tell, I'm very ADD. So I probably rewrote this with a great concept in my mind, but it's gone. So deloads, very important. Again, going back to fatigue management, if you're not really being aware of your fatigue management, this can really become a problem. Some people have set deloads. The training program I'm running right now, I know Dr. Lane Norton has talked about in some of his articles when it's fat, power hypertrophy, adaptive training, where it's a combination of power bodybuilding. Great results. He turned pro natural bodybuilder with that. I know he's implementing that routine now, I believe, with still powerlifting, but I could be wrong. But anyway, I don't think he takes, at least in the article, back in 2010, he didn't take scheduled deloads. He took them when he needed them. And deloads are, some people take away intensity of volume. It depends. I personally take away intensity and I cut my volume in half for a week. Works well for me. Time of the day. Great research on Mass Research Review about this. Personally, for me, some articles say no, some articles say yes. I like training first thing in the morning after about 500-600 calories to a shake. I have some complex carbs, some simple carbs. I have a protein source, quick acting protein source. I have honey, all natural peanut butter. It works well for me. I mean, I'm not like the most individual person, like every single macronutrient has a specific purpose, but it just works well for me. Some people like training more at night, but there is a nice, research review that just came out, and I believe in the December Mass Review, where they looked at, can training at night, I think it was based on your mental function. I can't remember. I didn't highlight it yet. But they were talking about some people are better off training in the morning because it's fresh for them. So also cool. We talked about eccentrically loaded positions. The eccentric is half the movement. Okay, remember? Eccentric, isometric, you're holding it, concentric. All have its points. Fun fact, in the rehab world, when it comes to physical therapy and stuff like that, isometrics have great research. Are they that important for muscular hypertrophy? It's hard to say, but they are very beneficial for the rehab purposes when it comes to physical therapy. Very cool. Pre and post food. I'm not going to talk about this a lot because I could talk about this for 25 hours. But for me, I like to have a complex of simple and complex carbs. I think the research on that is pretty good. If you're having a large protein source right before you go lift, I'm in the gym 20 minutes after I have my shake. Probably even not even the most optimal thing, but some of my training sessions are 2 hours, and I enjoy that. I enjoy it. Again, if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to want to do it. So more than likely, the anabolic window for me, is not that important. I can go a couple hours without having more protein because I just had a bunch of amino acids. So, but if you're training fasted in the morning and your last meal was quite a little bit away, it's a little bit more important. Caffeine. I love caffeine. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Ergogenic effects, really cool. Great research on Mass Research Review. Do you need a coach? It depends. Do you want a coach? Do you work better with a coach? Does a coach keep you accountable? I'm extremely accountable. I don't need a coach, but I like talking about research with people. So I'm kind of, pull some information from them really sneaky. Macros, boom, whatever. Cardio, it's a tool. It is a tool. I'll say that again. Cardio is a tool. If your coach or someone is primarily driving your fat loss through cardio, you more than likely want to get a new coach because it is a tool. You can get extremely shredded. I have seen people get professional bodybuilding natural shredded, 5% DEXA, 6% DEXA, doing 4 cardio sessions a week. 2 hours of cardio a day. Your coach is either pulling your prep a little too short, and then you have all sorts of problems. You're not coming on stage grainy. You're potentially coming in flat. You're potentially spilling over because of the glycogen problems. So you have a huge factor of issues if you're competing and you're not taking these into account. So there are a lot of bro science people out there that get great results. But if you implement all of this, I believe you'll get better results. Now, let's pull this up real quick. This is my thank you board. I'm just going to, we got Mass Research Review, Dr. Eric Helms, Greg Nuckols, Mike Zordos, Dr. Mike Israel, the whole team of RP, Jared Feather. I'm actually going to put this right here. So if you want to take a picture of that or pause it, I would suggest following. This list is no way all-inclusive. These are just the names that came to mind. Jeff Nippard, great. My buddy Ishak coming out with a book. Ogus, can never forget about him. My buddy Paul Hunt. Hunter Pauly, who's an RD, all these other people, a lot of them researchers, Dr. Brad Schoenfield, Eddie Joe, my 2 guys who work for BioLane, Lane Norton, obviously, David Mathis, Alan Aragon, just all great people in the industry to follow. And it's really hard because there's so much information that is just asinine, false, not optimal, and we have to accept that. This is something I want to talk about. This is a little bit of mental health real quick. You cannot force change on anyone. So spending half of your day angry because people don't want to listen to science makes zero rational sense because you're being irrational trying to put your beliefs on them. They don't have to listen. They don't have to be scientific. Let them do their thing. Focus on yourself. Stay in your own lane. That's important. Better mental health, better training. I completely made that up. There's definitely no correlation there, but that's actually not true. I have read some stuff on there in the medical sense where obviously mood affects lots of things in your life. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day.